We're continuing our series on what would Jesus do, and we are looking, are you looking for the king is what we're titling this, because we're going to be dealing primarily with the story of the wise men, or in some of your translations, the magi, that were coming to see Jesus. And so we're going to be in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 23, basically the whole chapter. And we're not going to read all the verses, but we're going to read a good bit of them. And most people get their facts about the birth of Jesus from Christmas cards, cute Christmas pageants that we do with the youth in a church, traditional Christmas carols, or sentimental nativity sets. But they don't get the story straight from the Bible. And so a lot of times what we think did not happen the way we thought it happened. There's a very famous carol, Christmas carol, We Three Kings. The wise men were probably not kings. They were probably more people who were very involved with looking at the stars, astrologers, but they would not have been kings. And so, here we sing a song that people have known for years, and yet it's probably not completely accurate. So what does the Bible say? We're going to start in verse 1, and it says, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the reign of King Herod, and about that time some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem asking. Okay, so what we see here is these wise men. Like I said, in some of your translations it will say magi. These people would have been involved with astronomy, not astrology per se. And we get the feeling that the star that they were following was not a typical star. It would have been a new phenomenon. And they would have been following it. And they probably could have been following it for 1 to 2 years. So Jesus is probably somewhere between 1 year old to 2 years old when the magi or the wise men, whatever your translation is saying, arrived. And so we have two kings in this chapter. Two kings. The first king that we saw in verse 1 is Herod. And Herod is, he's a nasty guy. And he had killed a wife, he had killed a son. Anybody that he thought was a threat to his throne, he killed them. He was just a nasty, nasty guy. We know that he was over the Herod, or the king of the Jews per se, from 37 BC to 4 BC. And that's when he died, was 4 BC. So that's why we know that our math is off, and Jesus would have been born somewhere between 4 and 6 BC. He had to be born, somewhere between 4 and 6 BC, because Herod is alive when Jesus is born. And like I said, Herod was the one that enlarged the temple, and he had some great building things that he did. Some of us who have been to Israel, what he did in Masada was incredible. The palace he built there. He was known as a builder, but he was just a terrible, terrible guy. Now, 2:2 says, and we saw his star as it arose, and we have come to worship him. Now, we're going to really tackle this here shortly about the wise men, what they said. But here the wise men are saying they've come to worship the second king, and the second king would have been Jesus. So we have Herod, and then the real king, which is Jesus. Now, the question is, who are these wise men, or magi, in whatever translation that you have? The wise men were likely from Mesopotamia and were culturally influential students of the stars. They were not evil magicians. They were not bad people per se, but they are coming and they're following. They've seen something in the heavens that's different, and they've been following it. But I want I want to come back and deal with this. How did they know about this new king? If you saw a star and you're following that star, you would not come to King Herod and state what they said. You would say something to the liking of, we saw a star and we're just following it, where it's leading us. But here's what they said. I want to read it again. We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him. How would they know that? That's a really good question. How would these wise men know that at the end of this star, it's going to lead them to somebody that needs to be worshiped? We believe in what is called revealed prophecy. Everything we believe about God, he's had to tell us. God is so far above us that we can't know everything about God unless he tells us. Now, we can know some things about God by watching just nature. We can see that God is creative. When you look at all the different things he's created, all the different animals, we can see that God is powerful when you see storms and things like that come through. But we wouldn't know about God's heart unless God tells us. These people would not know about someone they've come to worship unless somebody had told them. And so I lean towards, this is from Balaam. This is in Numbers 24, verse 17. Balaam is from Mesopotamia. And Balaam was the one that had the donkey that spoke to him. If you remember that story, Balaam was hired and traveled 400 miles to Moab. To Moab's king had said, I want you to give us a prophecy against Israel. I want you to speak against Israel. And when he got there, God wouldn't let him do that. And so he started prophesying in favor of Israel. And in verse 24:17 of Numbers, he says, I see him, but not here and now. I perceive him, but far in the distant future. And here's where we see it. A star will rise from Jacob. A scepter will emerge from Israel. And it will crush the heads of Moab's people, cracking the skulls of the people of Seth. And so that section in the middle there, a star will rise from Jacob and a scepter will emerge from Israel. I lean towards them, Balaam being from that area, they would know about something about a star rising. Also, Daniel wrote from Babylon, and they would have been familiar with some of the Jewish writings. And so somehow these wise men would have known a little bit about Judaism in the sense of Daniel from Balaam. And now when they see this star, they're going back and going, this might be what Balaam's talking about. So they're following it because that's the only way they would have had an idea that there would have been something at the end of the star that they would have worshiped. Okay? Now, God brought the king's birth to the attention of these Gentiles who probably journeyed many months, possibly 1 to 2 years from Mesopotamia to Jerusalem. Matthew includes this information to alert his Jewish readers to several different realities. Now, we've talked about this when we started this series, how Matthew is writing to Jewish people. And he is including a ton of prophecies from the Old Testament because the Jews know prophecy. They know what the Old Testament says. So he's constantly quoting Old Testament prophecy. But even in Matthew, who's talking to Jews, he points out several things that are pretty important. One, the event of Jesus' birth had a worldwide impact. That this star was seen by these wise men from Mesopotamia. Second, the Messiah was coming through Israel as a gift from God to all the nations of the world, not just to the Jews. We see that from the Abrahamic covenant in Genesis chapter 12. All in the Old Testament, you can see how the Jewish people were supposed to be an example for the rest of the world about how their God was the real and only God. And so this goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 12. And the third thing, in contrast to the indifference of the Jewish chief priests and scribes, who should have anticipated the king's birth, these Gentiles were overwhelmed with joy. So here's a book written to Jewish people, and yet Matthew is saying the people that came, that traveled the great distance, were Gentiles. And so he makes that really important for you to know. And so let's look at this question and then come back when you're done discussing it in your hotspot. How does this passage speak to God's desire to reach the nations with the message of Jesus? And we'll see you back in a few moments. All right, let's continue on. So what does the Bible say? And we get into verse 7 and 8, and it says, Then Herod called for a private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them when the star first appeared. Now, what's interesting here is, and I want you to think through this. So the wise men come, and there had to be a caravan. I know we sing songs like We Three Kings, and we think there was three, maybe wise men. We don't know. We have no idea. Where the word three kings or three wise men come from is there was three types of gifts. And that's where they have come up with three. But we don't know how many there were. We know there had to be more than two because it said men, plural, but we don't know how many. And so he finds out when the star appeared, and this is fascinating to me. He says, then he told them, go to Bethlehem and search carefully for the child, and when you find him, come back and tell me so I can go and worship him too. Now, we're starting in verse 7, but if you go to verse 6, you see that you find out that Herod went to his leading priests and scribes and said, where's the Messiah going to be born? And they all said, Bethlehem. They said, Bethlehem. And so they don't know, there comes a point. Have you ever looked up at a star and you think, am I under that star or am I under it now? I mean, there comes a point where you can only follow something so far, and then you're under it, and you're like, okay, now what do I do? And so they got to Jerusalem knowing that when they left, the star was out here in front of them, and they walked to it, and now the star is above them. And Bethlehem is 70 miles from Jerusalem, right? And so now it's like, okay, we know we're close. Help us. And so he talks to his priests and scribes, and they say, oh, it's in Bethlehem. He's going to be born in Bethlehem. They knew that. And so Herod is telling them. Herod is telling them. And then he says, when you go find him, come back and tell me, because I want to worship him. Now, we know that is absolutely not true. Herod had killed a son. He had killed a wife. Anybody he thought that was a threat to him. And so this is not making Herod happy. Their destination was not just a place, but a person, which happened to be Jesus, right? Now, here's the question that I have. Why did the leading priests and teachers of religious law not go to Bethlehem themselves? They come to Herod and go, it's in Bethlehem is where they're wanting to go. That's where the Messiah is going to be born. Wouldn't you think that the chief, the leading priests and the scribes would have said, the Messiah is here. We need to go to Bethlehem. That would just make common sense to me. And yet, nobody seems excited. You've been praying for the Messiah to come. And you don't even go 70 miles to check it out. Amazing to me. Verse 10 and 11 says, when they saw the star, they were filled with joy. They entered the house and saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So this is where people have said there might have been three people. In fact, legend has it that there were three people, three wise men. One's from India, one's from Arabia, and one is from Babylon, I believe. This is legend. And their bones are all buried in Germany in a church. Now, why did Germany get them? I don't know. But that's legend, that I wouldn't put too much stock in that. And there's also three names given to these three guys. And again, this is all legendary. I don't put any stock into it, and I would tell you the names, but I can't pronounce them. So we're just going to move on, okay? All right, so these wise men offered extravagant gifts, and that's why some people have said they must have been kings. They probably were not kings. However, they had to have some money and some influence, and because of the gifts, they probably might have been traveling with armed guards because they had this kind of wealth with them. They probably would have had some soldiers or somebody watching over this. So the gold emphasizes Jesus' royalty. And so throughout Scripture, whether these wise men realize it or not, gold is associated with royalty, kings, queens, and princesses. And so they brought gold. We also see frankincense emphasizes Jesus' deity. And so frankincense was used in the Old Testament not only for royal processions, but also in various offerings to God. You see it a lot used around the temple. And so that would emphasize a little bit about Jesus' deity, that he is the ultimate high priest for us, okay? And you go all the way back to Exodus and Leviticus and see where frankincense was used to the service of God. And then myrrh emphasizes Jesus' humanity. And so myrrh was basically a perfume that was used with different purposes. What I find interesting is when you look at Jesus on the cross, he was offered myrrh mixed with water when he was on the cross. And that was when he was dying. That would have been the humanity side of Jesus. And we read that in John 19, verses 38 through 42. And so the myrrh emphasizes Jesus' humanity. All right, here's question 3. Describe the reaction of the religious leaders to Jesus' birth, and how does this reaction serve as a warning maybe to us? They knew where Bethlehem was the place these guys needed to go, and yet they themselves did not go there themselves. So talk about that in your group, then come on back. Welcome back. What does the Bible say? All right, we're going to be in Matthew chapter 2 again, verses 13 through 15. After the wise men were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, flee to Egypt with the child and his mother. The angel said, stay there until I tell you to return, because Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. That night, Joseph never speaks in Scripture. But every time God told Joseph to do something, he does it immediately. And here, that night, Joseph left for Egypt with the child and Mary, his mother, and they stayed there until Herod's death, and that fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet, I called my son out of Egypt. And that goes back to Hosea 1:1. Okay? So, again, Matthew is constantly throwing prophecy in here. And so here's the question I have here is, how could Mary and Joseph afford to go to Egypt? Last week we talked about when Jesus was 33 days old, by law they had to take him to the temple. He was the firstborn son. They had to take him to the temple and offer a sacrifice. And Mary and Joseph had 2 turtle doves that they sacrificed. they were supposed to sacrifice a lamb and a turtle dove. But they did 2 turtle doves because they didn't have the money to afford a lamb. So that tells us they were poor. And you could do 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons if you were poor. So here we've got Mary and Joseph, just by Jesus being 33 days old and what they sacrificed, we know they're poor. And yet, the night that the angel speaks to Joseph, he grabs his family and off they go to Egypt. How did they afford that? Well, they afforded that by having the gold, frankincense, and myrrh that the wise men had brought. That allowed them to pack up, go to Egypt, and stay there, and that's how they lived off of those funds. Isn't it amazing how God always provides? God is going to tell you to do something, and if he tells you to do it, you should do it by faith, and just do it because God is going to provide when you need whatever you need to do what God told you to do. And so that's what happened here. Now, verse 16 said, Herod was furious when he realized that the wise men had outwitted him, because they had a dream that said for them not to go back. And the wise men listened to the dream and did not go back through Jerusalem. They went around Jerusalem and went back home. He sent soldiers to kill all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were 2 years old and under, based on the wise men's report of the star's first appearance. So, this would have been, obviously, Jesus is at least 2 years or younger, because when they saw the star is what Herod is basing this on. Demographers, people who talk about how many people would have been living in Bethlehem at this time, said there would have probably been maybe 24 boys that would have been killed. There would have been 24 boys of 2 years or under in this area, and the soldiers would have grabbed these boys and killed them. Again, Herod did not want anybody to threaten his throne. So what King Herod did fulfilled the prophecy in Jeremiah 31 and 15. Again, Matthew throws another prophecy in there, talking about the crying and the wailing that would come out of Bethlehem. And so Rachel, who is associated with Bethlehem, this is where she died giving birth to Benjamin. It says her children would be crying and wailing. And so this is what happened here in Jeremiah 31:15. So verses 19 through 23 said, when Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt. Get up, the angel said, take the child and his mother back to the land of Israel, because those who are trying to kill the child are dead. Again, no words from Joseph. He just follows. So Joseph got up and returned to the land of Israel with Jesus and his mother. But when he learned that the new ruler of Judea was Herod's son Archelaus, he was afraid to go there. Then after being warned in a dream, he left for the region of Galilee. So the family went and lived in a town called Nazareth. This fulfilled what the prophets had said, he will be called a Nazarene. Now there's a lot to unpack here. First of all, Mary had not had another kid. Now we do know that Mary had some other, Jesus would have had some half-brothers, and I believe at least one sister, but she's not had any kids, because all Joseph brought back was Jesus and Mary. And then we see, so Jesus is now older. We also see that the son of Herod was a terrible guy, just like his dad. And Rome had heard so many complaints about him that they basically divided King Herod's territory into three spots. And so there were 3 rulers. And so Joseph took Mary to an area that was not part of Jerusalem area where the son Archelaus was. And so he felt safer being away from him. And so that's why we see he went to a town called Nazareth. Now, Nazareth is a nobody town. It's the town across the tracks that you don't want to say you're from. It is not a town that you would be proud to be from. That's what's fascinating to me, is God is making clear Jesus was born in an animal trough. He was born when there was no room in the inn, right? They went to shepherds at first versus the priests and religious leaders of the day. It was shepherds that first came on the night of his birth. They're doing everything they can to show that Jesus' birth was a humble beginning. You remember in Matthew, when Jesus was meeting, we'll see this a little bit later, when Jesus is meeting some of the disciples, one of them will say, what good can come out of Nazareth? You know, it's like, are you telling me the prophet, the Messiah is from Nazareth? I mean, Nazareth was not a place that had any respect. And so Jesus is reared in Galilee. So he's not reared in Jerusalem. He's not ruled in Bethlehem, which is further south. He is reared in Galilee. So how can you obey? Well, here's the question we got to ask ourselves. Here's the question that all of us need to answer personally. Do not be like King Herod, who feared how Jesus would invade his kingdom, his life, his plans, and his desires. And one of the things we have to realize is that when we become a Christian, God should invade every aspect of our life. He invades how we live our life. He invades what our dreams are from now on, where we want to go in life. He invades our how we pick a spouse or how we treat our spouse. He invades how we raise our children. Every area of our life changes. And so many people look at Christianity like a pie chart, and church and their religious life is just one slice of the pie. And yet when God becomes our king, Jesus becomes our king, he is over every pie slice. He is over every aspect of your life, and you think completely different. It now becomes about his kingdom, not yours. And so we need to think of everything we do in light of how would the Lord be pleased on this? How can I give him glory? How can I give him honor? Because Herod was afraid of anybody that would threaten his kingdom. And so the question is, Christianity has been around so long, and so many people's lives have changed because of Christianity. You would think anybody with any curiosity at all would go, you know what? There's a whole lot of people in this world that believe that Jesus was God in the flesh. Why don't I do my own investigation? And when you really get to the bottom of it, there's a whole lot of people that don't want God, Jesus, to be God in the flesh. Because if he is, then it changes everything. It changes how they live their life. It changes how they view things, how they see themselves. It changes everything, and that's what it's supposed to do. I hope you think about that this week as we strive to become more like Christ, as we study the Bible, serve others, and share our faith together.